Well, the objective now that we've created an element template, is to add some attribute templates to this element template to make it useful. I mean, right now we've got an element template called mytank, no attributes. So, I mean, why would we bother to do this? Well, you know, at this point, you can't really use this for anything. So without attributes, an element template's kind of useless. And you're going to be asked to do this later on in an exercise. You're going to be creating an element template and adding attributes to it. So in order to do this, what you do is simply go into the attribute template section, do a right click on it, and create a new attribute template. So the attribute templates are roughly analogous to the simple attributes that we did before. So for example, before we had in a tank we had a diameter, and so that's what I'd like to add here. This diameter, I'll specify what the unit of measure is going to be. This is going to be in length, and we're going to measure this in meters. And we can give this a default value if you want, or just leave it alone. And the data reference is going to be, in this case, we're just going to be adding this as a constant, so no data reference there. And that becomes now part of my element template. Once I've defined that, now if I were to go out and build elements based on this element template, I would have a diameter. And let me show you the before and after here. I'll go back to my plant here with my tanks. And let's add a brand new tank. We got mixing tank, storage tank. Let's just do mixing tank 2. I'll choose a brand new element. This time it's going to be built on a template. It's the first time we've done it like this. And I'm going to call it mixing tank 2. So you can see it picked up the name of the element template. But look at what was produced on there. When we look at the list of attributes, it's got the attribute that we had defined in the element template. If I go back into this element template, and if I make changes to the template, you'll notice that is a change that will propagate through all of the elements that are built on that. So if at this point I decide, well, I forgot to add the height, so let's go ahead and add height to this. We'll do a height. We'll say that this height is also measured in length, in meters, and we'll have no default values. And once I've checked that in, watch what happens back at our element that I just created. Here's our mixing tank 2. If I refresh my screen, you'll notice that now that height, it's been added as a new element or attribute template to the element template that is propagating forward to all the elements built on that. So that's something to keep in mind. It's a nice powerful feature, but it does mean that making one change to an element template may end up changing hundreds and hundreds of elements. So keep that in mind as you're working with this. Another issue to keep in mind is to try to decide beforehand which of the attributes you're going to specify are part of this element template, and which attributes you may want to allow people to add on their own individually after they create the element itself. So if you are going to allow people to extend the elements that are based on an element template, you do have to choose this allow extensions. Now, allowing extensions will allow people to add new attributes to an element that's that's based on that element template. Just a bit of a warning, it's currently not possible to add child elements to an existing element that's defined in the element template. That's one extension that's not allowed, adding child elements to an existing element or an existing attribute that was created by default when you created that element. So you can create new attributes, but not new child attributes of an existing attribute in the element template. So that's one restriction on allowing extensions to keep in mind. Okay, so how do you go about checking, making sure this is all working? Well, one of the things I could do now that I've chosen allow extensions and I've got a couple of attributes here, again, if I just go out back to the elements here and add a brand new element, let's go ahead and put this right underneath here, or right at the same level there. I'll go ahead and choose a new element. If I base that on my tank, again, it picks up the name mytank and it just adds an increment to it. If we look at the attributes, those are the attributes that we had. And then at this point, I can add new attributes I'm just going to go ahead and call this test. And see, that is allowed because I did allow extensions on the element template that this is based on. So the element template called mytank does allow extensions. That's why I was allowed to add that. So if I check this in, this double check, or this checks and verifies that everything seems to be working correctly with this element template. Now, one of the things that element template supports is the idea of a base template. So if you go back and take a look at the general settings here on this, notice there's an option here to create a base template. The base template implements the kind of inheritance that is required sometimes when you have, let's say you've got a base tank that has 6 attributes, but then you have another type of tank that adds an extra 2 attributes. Well, you can have the base, that base tank be the base template for the more specific template that adds those 2 attributes. Let me show you an example of that. And that next, or the more specific element template only needs to add what's not in the base template. I'll show you an example of that. If I go out to my training examples here, we take a look at our element templates collection. You'll notice we have these 2 very similar element templates, this power distribution measurement, and it's got these attributes right here. We also have that with status. The with status, it seems like it only has 1 attribute, but if we take a look at its general description here, you notice it uses as its base template the power measurement. Now that indicates that anything I build using that structure there is going to pick up not only that one value there, the status value, but also all of these as well. And I can verify that by going back and taking a look at the elements. If I take a look at the elements and do a quick search, we go ahead and do an advanced search here. And if I take a look at all of those that have the power dist measurement with status, we find those. This looks good. Let me just go ahead and select all of them. These are going to show up now in my search results. If we take a look at these, as you can see, the list of attributes includes all of those attributes we saw before, plus this one called status. So that's because it's based on this template, and that template has a base template that includes this large number of attributes right here. Now, if you'd like to double check what type of inheritances you've already got set up, one of the options you can do within PySystem Explorer is, as you're looking at your templates collection, you can choose to view them by template inheritance. So by viewing these by template inheritance, you'll see, if we drill down through this power distribution measurement has, there we go. It has that list of attributes, and then organized within that as a child, to this base template is this additional status reading. So that's an example of using a base template.